Welcome one, welcome all, welcome back to Women in Film Reviews. Hello everyone, just in case you're new around here, my name is Helen and I am a film fanatic and a hardcore feminist. You may have remembered that in 2019 I started a little series called Women in Film Reviews where I reviewed films written and or directed by women. Well, I've since moved from London to Leeds and I am proud to say that Women in Film Reviews is back. I'm going to entitle this Season 2 and retroactively refer to the first 6 episodes as Season 1. So if you want to go back and see those, I highly encourage you to. I covered films like Lady Bird, Booksmart, Frozen, and a few other favorites. So today we are going to be sitting down and discussing Birds of Prey, or the Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn. Or, if you were looking at Fandango right after the movie came out, Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey. Yeah, that was an interesting time. So, Birds of Prey. Where do we start? Well, Birds of Prey, or the Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn, is based on the Birds of Prey comics. The film was directed by Cathy Yan and is written by Christina Hodson. The film was released on February 7th, 2020. It was one of the last theatrical releases we got before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The film cost around $82 to $100 million to produce, and as of right now, its total box office take is $200 million-ish. It is important to note with the film's box office, though, that one, it was released right before the pandemic hit full swing and therefore its box office potential was a bit muted. And also, this number doesn't include any of the sales from the film's early VOD release. The film was also critically well received and it has a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, what is this film about? After she breaks up with the Joker, Harley Quinn finds herself on the hit list of almost every baddie in Gotham City, including one Roman Sionis, a madman who is on the search for the Patron-only diamond. He also has a penchant for defacing his victims. When a young pickpocket named Cassandra Cain steals the Patron-only diamond, Harley vows to find her to get back in Roman's good books and inadvertently gets mixed up with Black Canary, Roman's driver, who has a secret supernatural ability, Renee Montoya, a cop who's currently building a case against Roman Sionis, and Huntress, a vigilante who is out for revenge against the people who killed her family. When Roman turns against all of them, Harley and the Birds of Prey must team up to protect Cass and to take Roman out. So a bit of background about my history with this movie. I was invited to an early screening and I got to see it in IMAX, which was a really great experience. The thing that I love most about this movie is that it is a hell of a good time. It's not a perfect movie, it's not a prestige movie. It is a movie that knows exactly what it's supposed to be, a fun, R-rated superhero romp, and it pulls that off perfectly. This does open it up a little bit to comparisons with Deadpool, which is the other R-rated superhero comedy, especially because there's a lot of talking to the audience and fourth wall breaking, but I would argue that Deadpool is more in the fourth wall breaking camp, whereas this more plays out as a story that Harley Quinn is telling after the fact. And so she's kind of more of an unreliable narrator than she is breaking the fourth wall all the time, although she does do it a couple times in frame. In fact, I would actually say that Harley's narration is more along the lines of that of Cher Horowitz in Clueless. I mean, think about how this movie would have played without Harley's narration, or think about how Clueless would have played without Cher's narration, and think of how different those movies would be from what they actually became. The narration makes them. The film is also paced incredibly well, which is another reason that the unreliable narration works so well. Harley is telling this tale how she remembers it, and of course she's going to remember bits and pieces at different times. But the result of this is that even though it's not necessarily linear, we meet each character when we're supposed to. So we start off just following Harley, we meet Roman, and then we meet the other characters and they get their time to shine. Not to mention that the comedy is on point. I think that's another example of how great this movie is paced. There's never a dull moment. and it's just funny. As I said before, the entire cast gets to stand out. I really like specifically Journey Smollett-Bell as Black Canary. Rosie Perez as Marine Montoya is arguably the least physically skilled of the bunch, but she's also super, super smart, and she also kind of acts as a bit of a seasoned veteran to all these newbies. Huntress is just such a great character. She's this badass, but she's also like really awkward because she hasn't really had a lot of peers growing up. And I really like how plucky Ella J. Basco plays Cassandra Cain. She's super smart. She's smarter than people think she is. A lot of times kid actors kind of get a bit of a bad rap because it might be too over the top, but I think Ella J. Basco actually gets it quite right with Cassandra Cain. But of course, we have to talk about Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. She is this movie. I wasn't a super big fan of Suicide Squad, and I know that a lot of people really didn't like Suicide Squad either, but they liked Harley Quinn in that movie. So it's nice to see her get to shine in a movie that it is also a team-up movie, but it's very much her story and her evolution, and getting to see her without the Joker, which is kind of a rarity, actually. I can't believe we're about to see Margot Robbie win Best Actress for playing Harley Quinn next year. I really wouldn't be mad if that happened. As far as the other characters go, I think Ewan McGregor is quite good as Roman Sionis, although there's a couple little issues that I want to talk about in depth a little bit later. Chris Messina is terrifying as Victor Zsasz. Man. He is just the right amount of menacing, and you immediately get that these two are just bad. They are bad. I think the action scenes are really well shot. They had some of the people who worked on John Wick assist with the shoots of those, especially the action scene at the end in the booby trap. One of the things I really like about these action scenes is that, one, fitting the tone of the movie that they're in, they are super over the top. They don't take themselves seriously unless they need to. And they also play to each character's strengths. There's, again, I'll just keep coming back to that scene in the booby trap at the end. You have Harley's fighting style versus Renee's versus Black Canary's versus Huntress. They all have these amazing strengths that they use to get what they need to do done. And there's also the car chase immediately after that where Huntress is helping Harley out and Harley's on roller skates. That is one of my favorite action scenes in the entire movie. They're not just punching people, they're using these characters' strengths to, well, their strengths. Another thing I'll say is that you always know what's going on in these action scenes. There's not a ton of close-ups that are trying to confuse the audience. I think there might be a couple. But overall, you know exactly what's going on, you know where the characters are, and really that's all I can ask for. I just want to know what's going on. Another aspect of the cinematography that I really, really liked is the fact that they play up the comic book setting. And Harley Quinn, she's an interesting character, and she's a comic book character. So instead of being all dark and serious like things like Batman v Superwoman, even Wonder Woman to a little extent, they just have permission to make this such a visually appealing film. I love the scene where Harley comes in and takes over the police station. It doesn't play out how you think it will, but they use color to its fullest extent here, and I absolutely love it. And that's the kind of thing, is Harley is this bright, kind of insane character. So it makes sense to really play that up in the cinematography and in the production design. So one critique that this film has gotten is the fact that it is very unlike the Birds of Prey comics. For example, Harley Quinn is actually not a member of the Birds of Prey in the comics. I think there was a Birds of Prey run done after the film went into production where they did have Harley Quinn interacting with them. But historically, this is not the case. I believe Margot Robbie, when she was pitching Harley Quinn ideas to Warner Brothers for a Harley Quinn film, she came across Birds of Prey and thought it would be a good idea. There's also criticism that there are characters in this adaptation that don't appear in the comics and that some characters are quite different. I think Cassandra Cain is, from what I hear, the biggest example of that. So these big changes might be a bit big for some longtime fans to swallow, and honestly, I get it. There are adaptations of some of my favorite books that I'm actually not super a fan of, or that didn't capture some of the spirit of the books. But making an adaptation of a book or other source material that is vastly different to its source material, it isn't always a bad thing. Something that I point to as an example all the time is the How to Train Your Dragon films. They are vastly different from the books, but I think I personally prefer the movies. I do like the books for their whimsy and their light tone towards the beginning, although it does get darker towards the end. But for me personally, I connect way more to the films, and I actually saw the films first. So it's not always a bad thing, in my opinion, to make an adaptation that is very different from the original. And I actually think this kind of works in Birds of Prey's favor. I haven't read the comics. I really enjoyed this movie. And I have a feeling that I would enjoy the comics as well, both before and after this movie. So getting into more of the issue of representation in this film, I do have to applaud the casting. We have a very diverse ensemble in the Birds of Prey. In our main five, we have 2 white women, Harley Quinn and Huntress. We have Renee Montoya, who's Latina. We have Journey Smollett-Bell as Black Canary, who's African American. And we have Ella J. Basco as Cassandra Cain, who's Asian American. We also get some subtle lesbian and bisexual representation. There's the opening animated sequence where they confirm that Harley Quinn is bisexual. And later on in the film, we see that Renee Montoya has an ex-girlfriend in the form of the assistant DA, played by Ali Wong. The representation also kind of comes down to the costuming. These women are definitely and decidedly not dressed for the male gaze. For Harley Quinn, I think the direct comparison is, of course, her costume in Suicide Squad, which was basically the hot pants, the ill-fitting shirt. But in this movie, she definitely has more agency in how she dresses, and it is also meant to be something that she can move around and fight in. I know that there was a lot of critique from the male fans of Harley Quinn when the film came out that they didn't dress her sexy enough. And I mean, as a bisexual woman, I think they did a good job, but that's just me. Trust me, it's a lot sexier when a woman dresses like she has some sort of agency. These 5 female leads, in addition to, being racially diverse, they also have very diverse personalities, and it takes a long time for them to be able to come together, and even when they do, it's quite reluctantly. But they learn to work together and to care about each other over the course of the film. I think it's interesting to see Harley and Cass's relationship develop in particular. Harley doesn't really see herself as kind of a big sister figure, but she reluctantly takes this kid under her wing, and she grows to really care for her by the end of the movie. Now, of course, the villains, aka our 2 major male characters in this film, they are quite violent, hence the face. Yes. Even when they're not being physically violent, we are shown that they are people to be feared. There's the scene in the club with Roman Sionis, who is just annoyed at this woman's laughter, and he makes her get up on this table and dance, and then he makes her take her dress off, and that is sexual assault. And it's just, is he hitting her? Is he killing her? No, but he is taking away her agency, and honestly, that's terrifying. That is some deeply seated fears that the director and the screenwriter are calling upon to make this effective, and honestly, it works. It's just terrifying. And again, the way that Victor Zsasz approaches Black Canary and is just talking so creepily to her. It's just, it's sickening. It's just, those are the most traumatizing parts of the film for me. Not like all the violence and blood and gore and whatnot. It's just the way that these men, they treat these women. So speaking of the men, and specifically of Roman Sionis, there has been some controversy. Ewan McGregor has mentioned, or at least hinted, that his character is gay, or that he was playing him as if he was a gay man. For me, watching his portrayal in the film, this actually kind of comes off as a bit problematic. He comes off as a very flamboyantly gay stereotype, if that is what he was going for. It is kind of a problematic stereotype. Some of the things that kind of tip me off specifically is when he's just kind of like dancing around. He dresses quite flamboyantly. He says ew a lot, like the Jimmy Fallon sketch. And this is kind of the gay stereotypes that we are trying to avoid. Maybe this is what was appropriate in the early 2000s, but for me, it just was kind of a bit off-putting. If I didn't know that Ewan McGregor was trying to play the character gay, I think would have been a bit off-put. But that being said, I don't think this was the right representation to go for, and I think it is a bit problematic if when you're told this character's gay, that this is your acting choice in playing them. And it is weird because there is positive LGBT representation in the film, as I mentioned before. So why do we have this kind of outdated stereotype in the form of Roman? Maybe it's just to make us not like him more. I don't know. If I were Ewan McGregor, I think I would re-examine the acting choices that he made. Lastly, let's talk about the music. I love the use of music in these movies. Something that I've actually quite noticed in the past 2 or 3 years, or maybe even a bit further, is that female-directed films tend to use a lot of popular music to underscore their movies as opposed to a traditional score. Some other examples of this include Booksmart, which I talked about. Hustlers is another one, and they specifically use the music to note down when the movie is taking place. I think Lady Bird is also a good example of this, although the music in that is not quite as aggressive. I think it works really well here. Some of the male critics that I watch tend to have a bit of a problem with the pop music being used in the film. They think it might be a bit too over the top. They think that it's just not necessary, it's jarring. I love a good pop music soundtrack. I grew up with Radio Disney when I was younger, and then as I entered adolescence, I listened to more top 40. So of course, these are the types of songs that soundtrack my life, and I think a lot of other women would say the same thing, including a lot of the women who are directing these movies. I think because we've grown up with all this pop music and we use it to, underscore our lives and to associate it with certain emotions that you want to evoke, why wouldn't you use them in your movies? I think they're used great. Not to mention, I absolutely love Diamonds by Megan Thee Stallion and Normani. Every time that credit sequence comes on, I am dancing very badly, as my husband can attest to. I think it's interesting now that we're seeing quite a few movies, and female-centered movies, that are using popular music and songs as opposed to traditional scores, or in addition to traditional scores, to really underscore emotions. Because not only do you have things like Booksmart and Hustlers, you also have the work that Beyonce is doing. If you just saw Black is King, music is the primary method that she uses to tell the story in that film. There's nary a second of dialogue, but it's not a musical. I don't know. I am quite excited to see where this trend goes in the future, and I hope to see more of it. I mean, when I'm writing my own stories and my screenplays, I am listening to music all the time, and I'm thinking about the type of mood that I want to create. But enough on that. So, what do we make of the potential legacy for Birds of Prey? It underperformed at the box office, but nobody can really think of a concrete reason. WB, after the fact, kind of argued that maybe there wasn't really an audience for our Harley Quinn film, which, I mean, there was definitely demand. Everyone really liked Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad and wanted this movie. Not to mention that she is one of DC's most popular characters right now. So yeah, it definitely no demand for that. Another thing I mentioned earlier, maybe the men who liked how she was portrayed in Suicide Squad didn't like how the trailers were portraying her to be in this film. And it's kind of a stupid reason, I'm not gonna lie, but it could be a reason. I did see a lot of communities online trying to avoid this movie when it came out, which is a bit unfortunate because Harley Quinn has the potential to be more than just eye candy for the male gaze. And this movie proved it. On a similar note, I think more people were hoping for a movie where she was more involved with the Joker. We'll see, but I guess if you really want that, you can go back and watch Batman the Animated Series. The R rating might have something to do with it, although Deadpool made like $900 million with an R rating. So, maybe it has something to do with the fact that women don't often get to be in their own R-rated movies if they aren't gross-out comedies. I do like Bridesmaids, but gross-out humor isn't really my thing. Maybe the marketing wasn't that great. Maybe the February release date was kind of a sign of they didn't have very good faith in this movie. The title may have had something to do with it because people may not have realized that this was a Harley Quinn film since it was called Birds of Prey, although she was in all the marketing. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. And as I mentioned before, the box office performance was curtailed by the pandemic. Obviously, when February rolled around, it hadn't really hit in Europe or the Americas yet, but it had hit in China and Korea. And so that might have had something to do with it. As far as what this means for future Harley Quinn movies, she is slated to be in James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, whenever that comes out and goes back into production. Wear a mask, but then we get these movies faster. I think there is also a sequel idea floating around from Margot Robbie or from other people involved, but nothing has been confirmed on that front yet. Again, given the state of things, it's just hard to tell what's going to happen. Birds of Prey would have been the first of 3 female superhero films helmed by women that we would have gotten this year. The other ones being Black Widow, directed by Kate Shortland, and of course Wonder Woman 1984, directed by Patty Jenkins. Both of those have been pushed back, and I am kind of bummed that we finally got all these women directing these big budget features and then the pandemic hit. It's just how fate would have it. That being said, I'm super glad that we did get Birds of Prey this year and that we did get such an incredibly different take on female superheroes, because if you look at the 3 major superhero films that we've gotten, Wonder Woman is very different from Captain Marvel, which is very different from Harley Quinn, which is very different from Wonder Woman, and it's good to see a variety of female superhero stories being told. I'm also grateful for this movie because I feel like Margot Robbie and Kathy Ann and Christina Hodson took Harley Quinn back for the women. They made a movie where the women were allowed to be great characters instead of just saints or completely evil. Honestly, we need more of that. Marvel and the DCEU should be willing to take some more chances on that. As you guys can tell, I really enjoyed Birds of Prey, or the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. The title alone should really tell you what kind of tone that the movie is going for. So now I'm going to send it out to you guys. I want to know your thoughts. Did you like Birds of Prey? Did you not like Birds of Prey? How do you think they did Harley Quinn justice? How do you think they portrayed the members of the Birds of Prey comics themselves? Is there anything you would change? What didn't you like? What did you like? All of those questions, let me know in the comments down below. We can start a conversation. And speaking of continuing the conversation, as always, you can subscribe here on FilmGeek520 to get more women in film reviews every 2 weeks. You can subscribe on my second channel to get more personal content. You can follow me on Twitter at HelenMarie95, on Instagram at HelenMarie_95. I have a Facebook page now where you can get updates on my content. That is facebook.com/HelenGroteheisWriter. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to keep living awesome lives, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. Bye.